Well then, hello, this is a bit of an odd day because a full cinematic has came out, and it hasn't been data mined on the PTR or anything like that. Blizzard literally have put a full 4.5 minute cinematic out. And it's not a trailer. It is an in-game cinematic from patch 9.2. Now, I've since found out why they've actually done this. They have done this because there are new campaign chapters coming out on the public test realm, and they want those testers to have seen the cinematic so that they can understand some of the story. Now, considering how I do believe that we should be prioritizing the average player and them playing it all in-game first, I do think it's a very strange way for this to come out. More thoughts on that later, but that's why there's a new cinematic now. Also then, just to set some expectations here, just so the things are realistic. Look, the Sylvana storyline has obviously been controversial. And I think it's been controversial for two reasons. Number one, the literal things that have actually happened with that character. And, well, actually three. Number two, I think some confusion over her motivations. And I think then number three, which plays into number two, is Sylvanas not really being told in-game that much. We don't get much of her perspective. We don't really see her as a point of view character. It's a sort of thing with this Sylvana story where it'll probably work pretty well in the book, World of Warcraft Sylvanas, right? If that book's just going to be her story from her perspective. But for a lot of players, especially the people who are more just playing the game, I mean, Sylvanas' story has been a weird, wacky ride that I think a lot of people have struggled with. And all of that means that no matter how good or bad the cinematic is going to be, it's certainly going to be controversial, and, you know, B, it's got to make do with the foundation that's been set for it, and it's a bit of a rough and rocky foundation. And as we get into this, it certainly, it does have the lore in an interesting direction, albeit one that was expected based on the Uther storyline in patch 9.1, as well as what we learned from Folk and Fairy Tales, the book, and also from like the little soul fragment, you know, at the end, right, when the jailer, you know, returns Sylvanas' soul to her, obviously not in a charitable way. Okay, let's get into the cinematic analysis bit. So the first thing I want to say is, I think it could be very easy for people to be a bit confused over what they're seeing here, and I've already seen some comments. I'm not blaming people for that. Basically, right, what we're seeing here is not a flashback, right? So nothing that you see here with Sylvanas is a flashback to, you know, like the good bit of Sylvanas looking on in shock as the bad bit of Sylvanas does a thing. It might look like that, but what we're actually seeing here is Sylvanas reliving her deeds while in a coma. So these are not flashbacks to something that happened inside Sylvanas' brain as she, say, ordered the burning of Teldrassil. This is Sylvanas reliving and reliving and reliving that moment now that she is kind of has these two parts, and it's her within a coma. So that's what you're literally seeing here. She's, of course, just lying on that table while, you know, our characters are sort of looking on over her. So in that initial bit, we see the Ranger General Sylvanas, complete shock at what Banshee Sylvanas has really done. Again, that's only because the jailer returned Sylvanas' soul to her, but the bond between those like fragments of her soul was shattered. And that has forced her to kind of live out this clash of wills while in that coma. Now, the challenging thing here is that Blizzard have previously, I mean, I think pretty much said in an interview that it's not like there's a good Sylvanas and an evil Sylvanas. Now, that is pretty strange when you look at this cinematic and the way that their visual storytelling portrays it. There very literally is evil Banshee, good Ranger General. So make of that what you will. I think my read of this situation is that whenever that soul fragment of Sylvanas was shunted back into her, what basically happened is it, like, you know, manifested itself in her brain as this Ranger General, and now she is having a identity or personality struggle that's playing out. I think maybe that's the way to read it based on what Blizzard have been saying, a bit more than just, we've always seen evil Sylvanas gallivanting about the place, and good Sylvanas has been reunited with her. Now, I will admit, a lot of people are going to say, you're doing mental gymnastics, bending over yourself, you know, playing a game of Twister, looking like a spaghetti, trying to make it make sense. All I'm trying to do is reconcile what Blizzard have said and sort of hinted at and insinuated in interviews and stuff with what we're seeing now, because I'll absolutely admit, I mean, the visual storytelling is 100% that we, for the longest time, knew evil Sylvanas, and good Sylvanas has finally been reunited with her. That's totally what it looks like, and I will admit, it could also be that. Because, you know, consistency has been a bit strange with Blizzard in these things. Now, we cut back, we see our characters having a chat. Bolvar, of course, you know, from his own experience with his own soul, knows, or sorry, not Bolvar, Uther, right? He kind of, with his own development, he knows what's going on with Sylvanas. He does have a little bit more empathy. Bolvar, of course, correctly identifies like, hey, she knows what's going on. We're going to need her to work out this domination magic, so we need to wake her up. And then, you know, Thrall and Bane and Jaina are all just like, oh, she's terrible and murderous. We don't want her back. You know, maybe she shouldn't wake up. Which actually opens an interesting philosophical little can of worms. So here's a fun teaser for you. Okay, so if somebody gets a brain tumor and then that changes their personality, say makes them murderous, but then whenever the brain tumor is removed, they return back to normal, what do you think of that person? Do you forgive them? Do you not? I mean, this has literally happened. It was not with murder. It was with, I think, another thing that's a word that I can't say on this platform. But it's an interesting little philosophical teaser, isn't it? I mean, even if it's not literally good guy Sylvanas, bad guy Sylvanas, and it's just her soul was wrought and therefore all these terrible things happened, and then her soul's reunited. I mean, her reunited, is that not, you know, is the only being in the timeline of Sylvanas that is the same as her reunited, not the Ranger General who got killed? Therefore meaning that, in a way, there's a difference in personhood of the Sylvanas that did all the atrocities, in which case, how much blame does that individual actually have? I would say it's quite heavily diminished, and not exactly the same, but there's a Stormblood patch, is it 5.2, 5.3? I think, or 4.2, 4.3, you know, with like the, well, I actually can't say the name because it'd be a spoiler, but the FF people will know. There's like a similar thing going on if, you know, villain does really terrible shit and, you know, their mental circumstances are altered, so we have to grapple with the degree of guilt and culpability that this individual that we see as they are now, you know, how much do they have? How guilty are they? And it's an interesting little question. So all these things are floating around with Sylvanas. Now, moving on, what Uther identifies is that Sylvanas' wound is a lot deeper than his, right? So she's a more hardcore situation of this jailery, you know, soul rending business that happens with Frostmourne. Now we go into Uther basically talking with Sylvanas and trying to muddle through all of this with the goal of trying to get her to wake up and fix the problem. So here's a quote from her. "I died trying to stop that monster, only to wake up haunted by one with my face." So, from the perspective of that Sylvanas, she's like literally just woken up and this is what she sees and she's forced to relive it and suffer. Now, in spite of everything I just said, that totally does just make it seem like, you know, good guy Sylvanas is back and is now looking in horror at what bad guy Sylvanas did. Right? Now, Uther then goes in and says, no, that banshee is you. Sylvana says, no, I cannot accept that. Uther, her path began where yours ended. Now, that's the weird thing, because if the banshee is her, but her path began where good Sylvanas ended, that does actually make a delineation, and that's a delineation that is marked by, you know, if this is the timeline of Sylvanas, well, you know, good Sylvanas is my pinky finger. She diverged because she got fractured off. So it's a little muddled and unclear, I suppose. Now, Uther tries to clarify all of this by talking about his own soul fracture, because Uther was fractured, and that led to the primary manifestation of Uther that we saw, you know, falling to like Devos and the Forsworn, which obviously was all part of the Jailer's plan. Now, with Uther, it was less of a hardcore sundering, so I don't think it was a situation where, like, you know, you had at least the visual storytelling of like a good Uther and a bad Uther as much, maybe. So, yeah. But that's just saying that, like, Uther was part of the Jailer's plan. Arthas killing Uther. Which, you know, is interesting when we think about, like, agency and stuff when you go back to Warcraft 3. Yeah, anyway, so after this, Uther says, he had no doubts it would destroy you as well. Talking about the Soul Rending. Now, this is very much, I think, confirming that Sylvanas and the Jailer were a thing since Warcraft 3. Now, this is just the Jailer knowing that he has inflicted this grievous wound upon her soul in Warcraft 3. I believe canonically then, it's only after she hops off Icecrown Citadel and has the other death that the Jailer, you know, kind of slips into her DMs via the Valkyr, and that's where the Sylvanas that we kind of now know really starts to take off. The previous Sylvanas was just like, you know, good Sylvanas with like the whole, sort of some of the good bits of her missing. So she's more hardcore and, you know, a bit more okay with doing dastardly sort of evilish things. But that evil is kind of more harnessed and directioned whenever the Jailer comes in. So I think that's the read in that. And then as it goes on, the line from Uther is, will you accept her shattered legacy and tell us how to stop him? And Sylvana says, her crimes are unforgivable and I must face the consequences. Now, this is the really weird thing, because if this Sylvanas looks on the other Sylvanas in horror at what she's done, not really recognizing it as herself, but then identifying that, yes, like literally they are the same person, but that bit of her was soul fractured, it comes back to that sort of anecdote I gave earlier, right? Like, this Ranger General Sylvanas, like, let's just say, it's probably not going to be this, but let's just say execution was the punishment for her crimes, which in a sort of fantasy, medievally, you know, whatever sort of world, you know, execution generally is the sort of thing that would happen for something like that. I think we could agree. Would it be fair for Sylvanas, the whole reconstituted proper being, to be executed based on what she did when, you know, she was acting under very different circumstances with basically a large chunk of her soul removed? So even if you don't go with the, oh, this is just good guy Sylvanas being punished for bad guy Sylvanas' actions, it still feels, you know, it's a little bit messy, a little bit muddy, I would sort of say. Now, Uther says, you know, we cannot change the past. We may never find, you know, forgiveness in the future, but inaction damns us all. Time is short, so Sylvanas has to make her choice. And she does, because we see her wake up. We see her wake up in a way that is very much calling back, musically and all of that, and, you know, the camera as well, to what was going on with Legion, right? Where, you know, as Vol'jin died, Sylvanas rises up. So, yeah. That's the crack there, everybody. That's what's going on. And it is an interesting situation, because I think you can tell from what I've said so far that, you know, I think this is roughly what we expected, right? I pretty much remember saying around patch 9.1, okay, they're going to use the split soul thing to diminish her culpability, find a way to soft redeem her, and then probably work out how to put her back in the box for a little while. So it doesn't feel like she's the protagonist or, you know, the main character of Warcraft. I think that's pretty much still what they're going to do, actually. Yeah, and, you know, if you want my personal thoughts on this, from, like, more of a philosophical angle, I mean, in this case, I think that the Sylvanas who did those terrible deeds is gone. I don't think she exists anymore as soon as Sylvanas wakes up, in fact. And this is not me saying this in terms of like, this is where I want the story to go. This is more my philosophical response to the quandary of what the fuck do you do with Sylvanas, right? And I think my philosophical response to that is new Sylvanas is, I mean, even the way that they visually represented it, I don't think it's fair to punish the Ranger General for what the Banshee did, when the Ranger General had really literally no part in it. And you could then say, well, this is all just some sort of metaphor for saying you have this badness, you have this darkness within you. If all of your empathy and compassion was removed, look at the terrible things that you could do. And I'd say back to that, okay, yeah, but if you externally had your empathy and compassion removed, did a terrible thing, got them back, and were back to your old self, I mean, is the true blame there not on the person who removed your empathy and compassion and then used you as a tool to do all these terrible things? And yeah, like I know a lot of, I think baggers will come into this. I think a lot of people just say, oh, here, look, it's Sylvanas. I just couldn't be bothered with her anymore. Lop her head off. Let's be done with it. No more World of Warcraft Sylvanas is the main character, please. And, you know, like broadly, I do kind of agree with that. But I'm trying to take this for what it is and work out what I think should really be done with Sylvanas. And, I mean, yeah, it's kind of frustrating. There's a lot of things between a few different games and, you know, pieces of media that I'd love to bring in here. You know, some shows such as, say, even Mr. Robot. But, you know, some Mr. Robot Season 2-ish things are, you can sort of feel them a little bit. But to do so would involve spoilers, so I can't. I can, but maybe if you've also watched those things, you'll kind of know what I'm thinking about between the FF example and a little bit of the Mr. Robot. Not that this is the same as Mr. Robot. So it's a funny old situation. I think it's going to be weird. It'll feel unfair if, you know, good reconstituted Sylvanas takes like 100% of the blame for Banshee Sylvanas, because, I mean, that was a different person. It goes back to that sort of, you know, like little brain tumor story I recounted a bit earlier. So let me know what you think on that one. Now, as for some other things on the cinematic itself, you know, look, it's a WoW cinematic, so generally speaking, they look good. You know, they're well directed. The lines that are there are performed well. I would have a few criticisms of the writing. Sometimes it feels a little bit stilted. Look, sort of thing. I would like not naturalistic, but I'd like the conversations to go on just a little bit longer. You know, and they kind of do this thing of, you know, show, don't tell, absolutely, and that is good, and that is sort of done here, but they do quite a lot of show and tell, like the bit where, you know, she mentions, you know, the prince, and then it does a flash to Arthas, and then I think Uther says Arthas, or Sylvana says Arthas, or whatever. It's like, okay, you've repeated the same point with your, you know, like so many different times here that it feels like just a wee bit clunk, but maybe they were just trying to make that like super mega clear. That said, I mean, who's going to see that and not know that it's Arthas? So, you know, there was just a little bit of that with the dialogue that just, I mean, look, the usual, felt a bit on the nose. And I think overall it's a cinematic that could end up being quite unclear to a bunch of people. And it's just that thing. The visual storytelling of this basically does show that in her head, there is good guy Sylvanas and bad guy Sylvanas. And basically the result is that good guy Sylvanas has got to shoulder the blame of what bad guy Sylvanas did, even though good guy Sylvanas had no part in it. And meshing that with what Blizzard has said, which is kind of contradictory to that, about how the soul fracturing works, that it's kind of not just, oh, you're split in two, there's good you, bad you. That is a little bit challenging. Perhaps the in-game presentation will clarify that a little bit more. And I guess the other thing I'd say is, man, this is a really, like, Blizz, okay, look, I know why you put this out. You put this out so the testers and the PTR would see this and understand where your story is. Perhaps a situation where without this, Blizzard were worried that some of the new Covenant campaign chapters would be really, you know, criticized heavily, because without seeing this Sylvanas development, people would, you know, maybe not understand the new chapters, would be confused by them, maybe they'd come off wrong, and there'd be a bunch of criticism that wouldn't reflect the overall story they're trying to tell. So, that I do understand. Still, this is not the way for this to come out. I mean, it even is labeled on the WoW channel, in-game cinematic. This should be in-game. We should not be seeing it right now. And frankly, PTR testers, in my view, should not see any narrative content. My stance on this is actually hardened over time. I do believe that all the broadcast text should be encrypted so that we don't know what it is until the patch comes out. I think there should be none of the in-game cinematics. They should not be there. I think the Covenant campaign chapter should not be tested, because frankly, lots of other MMOs are able to do all that content without testing. Now, if Blizzard wants to do targeted raid testing for bosses and things like that, sure thing, fair enough. Do that for your gameplay and your class design and all of that, but let's keep the narrative out of it. I think that would mean that these things would, you know, you just see them all in the intended context. And look, I know that what I'm saying there, literally, it would lose Wowhead money, it would lose us money, it would lose every friggin' YouTuber money, whatever. That doesn't fucking matter. What matters is that people can enjoy the game. And I think when everything comes out in a super crazy fragmented way, I mean, it does increase the utility of channels like ours, because sometimes it's like, whoa, what? We just saw this out of the blue. can I outsource all of some of the thinking and understanding and, the legwork of looking through the disparate sources to somebody else so that I can digest the story? Because it's not my job to sit around trying to piece it, to make sense. So, it does provide us with a bit of purpose, a bit of utility, but that shouldn't be at the expense of, logging into the game on patch day and thinking, oh shit, what's going to happen? What am I going to get? How's it going to be? Anyway, that's really my thoughts and my lore analysis of this one. Yeah, that's what it is. I still have one final question. What's going on with the Uther we saw in Icecrown Citadel in those dungeons? Because he's not being dealt with, right? Because there's the Uther in the Shadowlands, Bluther, and then he gets his soul back. But what about the Uther we saw in Icecrown Citadel? Is that a plot hole? I'm confused, so I'd like to know. Yeah, okay, right. That's it. That's it for me. Have a nice day. Let me know what you think about this and what your responses are to the sort of, moral questions that I've posed in today's video. I'd love to know where everyone falls in this issue, so let me know. Have a great day. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Actually, it's future me here. I do have a quick little addendum because there's one thing that I cannot believe I did not say in that video, and it's sort of on macro narrative design and designing for an MMO. A potential criticism I have, and if you are a really big Sylvanas person, I really want to know what you think in this one. So this is a very, very hard confirmation that Sylvanas, at any rate, was severely impacted by whatever tomfoolery was done with her soul, right? And that means that the Sylvanas that we saw in World of Warcraft was kind of that permutation of Sylvanas. Now, there's a few things there. Does that kind of, what does it mean for agency in that character? And therefore, what does it mean for player investment in that character? Because it's now kind of turned out that the Sylvanas that we all got invested in, for a lot of people, I think that's the Sylvanas who, is overcoming the Arthas situation, and then around the Cataclysm era is sort of a more ruthless pragmatist, launching her war. I mean, come on, Silverpine Forest, it's a really fun leveling zone. So, does it feel funny to have been invested in Sylvanas at that time as a player and to have the rug pulled out from under us? Does it feel like that to people? And especially, too, with Battle for Azeroth, Blizzard quite heavily said that Sylvanas' story was morally grey, which is really hilarious when you look back on it. It does make you think, did they have all of this super well planned out? Because it ain't morally grey whatsoever, right? But a part of them trying to say that this was all morally grey was that a player could decide to be a Sylvanas loyalist. And that was supposed to be a valid way for a player character, a member of the Horde, to go. Now, that made more sense at the start of the expansion, and it started to make less and less sense as the expansion went on. And now we're at a situation where if you joined up, if you're a Sylvanas loyalist, you're canonically the bad guy. And I think that's being very prescriptive about the player character's role. And I suppose the thing is, thus far, the Sylvanas loyalists haven't had much payoff. I mean, they have at the end of Battle for Azeroth, but obviously Blizzard just took the decision with Shadowlands that, okay, Sylvanas is actually just a bad guy now. That's that. But I don't think it's really ever been dealt with in respect to the degree of player choice that was offered. Now, I don't know. I mean, obviously Alex Afrasabi's no longer at the company for all of those reasons, and I remember him having talked about some of that Sylvanas stuff, so maybe that was some of his ideas that are now benched a little. It's kind of hard to say, but yeah, it's a pretty clear criticism where this is the sort of thing where I think this very much, again, if this was a novel, if there's a TV show or a movie, you could probably do these things. You just need to have a good M. Night Shyamalan twist, i.e. Sixth Sense, and not a bad twist. Because in these stories, a good twist is when a movie's super, super enjoyable as you're watching it, and then the twist happens, the twist is really satisfying, and it reframes the things you've already watched, but in a way that's really satisfying. Whenever a twist in a movie is bad, what often happens is the plot has to make a whole bunch of sacrifices to make the twist work, so that it really is only appreciated in hindsight from the viewer's perspective, which is different to the perspective of the creator, who of course has always conceived their story knowing the twist. It's a very, very core part of storytelling, and it's something that we see sometimes done very well, and oftentimes really not done that well at all. I think some of that could be happening here, And it's just tricky because this isn't a single player game. This is an MMO where like the setting of the world matters a hell of a lot. And I think just that's something I forgot, really. I honestly forgot to talk about in the primary recording of this. And that's why it's a phone video to finish this off. Sorry for the decreased quality. Let me know what you think about that bit as well.